All right, so this one is something I've been sitting on for a while. It's a realistic STA-7 receiver. They call it the STA-7 receiver. I think it was part of a, component system that Radio Shack sold back in the day. This one, I believe, is from 1978. It's a very nice low-profile receiver. It's not very powerful, only about 10 watts per channel, but it's still pretty capable. I mean, I've used this before. It works well. Doesn't work great. There's some other issues. Sometimes the channels go out and get fuzzy. Or I guess they don't really go out, but they just get fuzzy, which is indicative of capacitor issues, which is common on this old audio equipment stuff. I have ordered the capacitors for this. You'll see that in a jiffy. I am just going to open this up, take a look inside, and see what's up. All right. So the reason why I want to just open this up is just to get a game plan, get a feel for how it's put together. Now this receiver, it's used to belong to my grandfather. He has now passed away. So it's very special to me. All right, so that's the rest of the screws I believe are on the back. I have actually opened this thing before, just never on camera. Other than the sentimental value of this thing, I really want to have just a small amplifier that can power these tiny bookshelf speakers so that I have something in here to test out equipment when they're on this workbench. Current issue I have is that if I want to test something out, I either have to hook it up to my PC, make a recording, listen back to the recording, or hook it up to some headphones if it can give me a headphone output. If it's only capable of line level outputs, then I have to plug it into my receiver if I can't plug it into my computer, which either way, the only convenient option is plugging in headphones, and that's not always possible. So my goal is to try and get this back into good working condition. Doesn't have to be perfect, but just good enough that it's not going to do those weird, like low quality, like fuzzy sound stuff. So what's nice about this is it's low profile, and the board is laying out, I should say, so that you can pretty much access everything from here. And of course, there are access panels at the bottom that you can remove to get at the bottom part, the actual pads. I have already done things like like I said, I've opened this up before. I have gone through, cleaned the switches with contact cleaner and everything, and those seem to be okay. Those seem to be as good as I can get it, I mean. I think what I'm looking at now is just the capacitors and, of course, cleaning off the board so that there's no electrolytic fluid everywhere, bridging anything, any connections. All right, so next is going to be recapping this.
Okay, so some time has passed since you saw that last clip, and I am now ready to recap this thing. The only thing about that is, this being a low profile amp, things are kind of crammed in here, and it's hard to reach all the electrolytic capacitors. There's some underneath this front plate. that I can't get to. Excuse me. One thing I thought about was just taking the access panels off the bottom. Thing is, I can't get to all the capacitors that way, and taking the boards out from the case isn't really going to help either, because there's a bunch of these wires and they're not very long, so there isn't much slack for me to move things around. So I'm going to have to think about a good course of action for this guy. My guess is I'm going to have to maybe take this front plate off to access these, or at least loosen it up. Another thing I may have to do is to just remove this heatsink, or at least detach it from the bottom plate so that I can get better access. The only thing I'll have to be careful of is the chips that are attached to it are the amplifier chips. I believe they're just transistor packages, but I don't want to ruin those either. So I'll have to be careful when removing this. But I think I am just going to start with trying to get this front plate off, loosen it up. I'm not super concerned about the tuning dial. I mean, I want to keep it functional so I can at least use the radio, but if I can't get it strung back up, it's not going to be anything too sad for me. I can just, at some point, get some more string, restring it. But it does look like there's a little spring that holds it on the side here that I could just pop off and de-string it, and then I will have a little bit easier of a time taking this thing off. So let's get going on this. All right, so I removed the knobs off the front, except the tuning knob. I'm not sure how that's held on. If it's not just friction fit on or held on with a screw, my guess is that it is actually part of the whole tuning knob assembly, which would not be ideal. I'm gonna undo the tuning knob system, or the string for the tuning system. A little bit fiddly of the process here. There we go. Okay, that's spring off. Now to reassure anybody watching, I do have the service manual for this, so if needed, I can look up the routing diagram for the string. Okay. Oh, it's holding on. See. Well, all I need to do is get the string out of the way, really, so I think that's fine. We'll just get it so that it's loose enough that I can actually maneuver around. Okay. Another thing I'm going to do is take these light bulbs out. These light up the tuning scale. How do these come out? There you go. Just in there. I think a couple of these bulbs are out. Almost all of them are out. They appear to be just standard incandescent lights. The only thing is they're soldered on to the connector, so if I wanted to replace them, it would be a project in itself. And I'm not really ready for that yet, especially for something that is probably going to be, for the most part, out of sight. My plan for this is to put it underneath this table, and the speakers will be up at the top, so that doesn't take up too much space, because if you can't tell, I have limited space on this table, and I need as much as possible for working on projects. At the same time, I do want something in this vicinity that I can use to test things out. Wait, that's right, listen. I think I will take these off just for good measure. I don't think they're supposed to come off that easily. I think they're supposed to be glued, but glued is all dried up. So they're basically just okay. So I'm not sure what to do with that knob, but I think I'm just going to circle back on that later, and I'm going to try and remove this faceplate. At least for here, but it's a little broken. The tab that it's squeezed into is a little broken. Let's see. It's working there. There's some screws at the bottom. Right. Closer. And does that help? Yes. Loosen the pulley. Honestly, I think what's holding it on right now is this tuning knob, which I don't know how that's supposed to come off, so I'll consult the service manual. I got it. It is press fit on. I just pried it off with some things at both ends. Pried it off on both sides. Kind of wedged it in there, and it seemed to help. But it's really tight on there. It's still attached somewhere though. It's not good. Thought this was going to be simple, but it's not. I think what I'll need to do is take off the access panels at the bottom. I'll start with this guy. Of course, like all the screws are different. I'll keep track of. Oh, there's a lot to keep track of. Ooh. Okay. Let's see. Oh gosh. So it looks like the there is quite a bit of weird stuff going on here. I mean, there's this little repair here, probably just a resistor that needed to be put in, or maybe a resistor failed and had to be put in again. I don't know. Another thing is around all the like the volume balance, etc. There's a bunch of really bad solder work here. Board's very burnt around it, and it's very, like, here, I'll show you. It's just very not great. It looks like something I would do, but I haven't even attempted to fix anything on this, so this is kind of, it's weird. So I'm gonna pause right now, try and get this thing off. So just sat down with a cup of coffee and looked at the service manual and realized that I should have just looked at that from the beginning, because, well, it's not very obvious, but there are two screws that you access from here. Let me try and focus on that. That's one of them. That is going to help me get this thing off of the front panel. Faceplate is off. Those two screws were what was holding it in. I probably didn't need to remove these brackets, although actually happy I did, because I think separating this from the body is going to give me the access I need. So I'm just going to put this down here. Another thing I did off camera was I took some of the capacitors out of the bags. You know, they do have the all the stuff, all the info that I need labeled on them, so it's not like I need the bags for anything, but just a convenience. So repurpose them. These are for the side brackets. And then access panel 1, the large one I took off, and then of course all the screws for the front face plates. The next task is going to be trying to get this front bracket off, which would most likely just involve taking all these, I guess detaching all of this stuff. So taking out the screws, getting them freed up, and making sure that the bracket can just detach. And so you do have to be careful, because some of these are different. Some of them are self-tapping, some of them are normal threads. I guess I should say some of them are fine threads. The advantage of doing this is now I'm going to have really good access to all the knobs and switches, so I can really make sure I give them a good cleaning with the contact cleaner. Then these ones I just pulled out are self-tapping, but they're wicked short and stubby. That's for the tuning knob, or around the tuning knob, I guess. So that's starting to come off. Look at that. And lastly, the one for the switches that's really small screws. They just have washers on them. These are just dust covers, so get those detached as well. switches. Okay. Getting closer. Looks like there's a little circlip that holds this guy to this little bracket. It's around this guy and holds this knob onto this bracket here. That's just a matter of prying it off. Thankfully, it didn't go flying. Basically, trying to get this thing to come off. Or that is getting this bracket to come off as well. There we go. Okay, we are golden, I suppose. And it looks like it's this guy, this post at the top. Oh, there we go. A little bit of a process to get this off. These guys hang on. Oh, you know? The tuning meter. I can't really push it through. There's a lot going on with this front panel. Just doesn't want to free up. Hang on. Ooh. Keeping going. All right. So I've got that freed up. Just move that out of the way. And now we've got access to those capacitors. I'm going to remove this plate from the front. Now the tuning meter itself is a little difficult. I think what I'll do is take a picture of the wiring setup and desolder the wires. Okay, I got that all squared away. Yellow is positive, black is negative. So it's somewhat logical, the black being the negative. And the last thing is just this guy, which appears to just be a light. So I'll have to get that out, and then this entire faceplate will be free. Okay, I had to plug in my phone to charge, and I also had to upload some of the footage. But one thing that's a little disappointing about this is that if you look at the underside of the board, there are no markings on, no like silk screen that tells you which component is which. So you either just have to know, or you have to mark them with a Sharpie like I did. The problem with that is, of course, if I got the wrong leg on one of them, that means I'll have to go back, resolder leg on whatever component that I got, and then try and do it again. But in any case, at least with this board, I got the stuff marked, and my new plan, well, let me talk about my old plan. My old plan was desolder one, take it out, put the new one in, solder it back in, and that was a little bit tedious and I think a little bit inefficient. So my plan is to desolder all the ones I marked, make sure that I can remove all of them, and then once I've done that, using my list of capacitors from the service manual, just put them in the proper locations, and then flip it over, solder all those guys in place, and I'll be good to go. And I think that's probably better than what I had done before. And that's would have been what they do when manufacturing this. Just shove in all the components, make sure they're in the right spots, and then solder them all in, snip off the leads, and they're done. It's one reason why I think there's no markings on the underside, because I was grumbling about that for a little bit, but I think it's just because this was probably cheap unit. I mean, Radio Shack was known as stuff that was pretty good but affordable. Another thing is this guy is only rated at 10 watts per channel, so it's a very low power unit, and it's a very low profile amp. The other thing is the capacitors. These ones are named Elna. Never heard of that brand. They don't sound particularly good.
but I'm guessing there was a lot of cost-cutting stuff, like the amplifier chips on the heatsink. Those are a very basic, like, off-the-shelf part. So they didn't use, in my Audio amp, there are a bunch of specific transistors that it uses, and it's got a lot more circuitry. This looks like it's using more off-the-shelf components, or as many as it can get. I mean, it's not like it's just a cheap unit that was thrown together. It's still very well built, because, I mean, it still works today. It's just, it was made at a price, and when it was manufactured, they decided, well, we don't need to print it on the silk screen on the underside if we've got it on top, because when manufacturing, that's where it really matters, is where to put each one and all that jazz. So anyways, gonna set this up, put it on time lapse, and start desoldering. Okay, so off camera, I just started pulling things out, and then I also found some things that I missed. There was one right here. I'm just gonna put some flux on it. It's a little bit easier for me to find than the Sharpies. The Sharpies are proving not great because there's a lot of flux that hadn't been washed off, and problem is, I didn't realize that until I had marked half of them, so like, I could have washed the flux off and then tried again, but then the alcohol would have removed my Sharpie. So it was just easier for me to just kind of go through, get them, but slowly but surely getting them out. Now when you have, looks like I may or may not have scratched off some of the solder mask, but when you have one that is being a little stubborn, one of the things you can do is take your iron and heat up one of the legs, melt the little bit of solder that might be on there, and while pulling down on the capacitor, just don't leave your iron on there too long, because the capacitor can get hot and then could hurt your fingers. And then lastly, this needed to be done a while ago. There's a bunch of leaky cap juice on there, and there are some parts of the board that look like they were starting to oxidize, so I'm thankful getting these guys off. I'm gonna remove all of them off camera. I think that's gonna be easiest for me, because I'm gonna be flipping this up, putting it down, and all that stuff. So be back in a jiff. Alright, so it took a while, but I got all the capacitors off. I did have to go back and forth, look at which one is this one, which one is that one. One thing I had to do was this plate I had to remove. That was no easy feat. I had to put my soldering iron up to like above 400, I think 415 degrees Celsius, to get it to overcome the thermal mass and melt the pads off. Needless to say, it wasn't really that fun, but I did it. And then also I did have to undo this resistor, the bodge wire thing, to get to one of them. But I'm gonna get set up a little better and start putting in the new ones. Bit difficult to get a good angle, but best method I found for doing this is you just gotta stand it up on its side, look for capacitor on the silk screen, and then using my list, I'm gonna be figuring out which one needs to go where. What I need to start with first is I need to clean off all the old residue from the old capacitors that were leaking as best I can, so that it doesn't continue to corrode the board or cause any damage. I think I need to use a toothbrush to do that. Basically, you're just trying to get this rubbed off best you can. And hopefully it helps remove some of the residue. I think feels like there's not much progress happening, but I think part of the problem is too, there might have been some kind of glue that was helping to hold them down. Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna pick a capacitor number, not go through my list. But let's look for C325. It is gonna be a 220 microfarad at 25 volts. And I found one, 220 microfarads at 25 volts. And then gotta be careful about polarity. And it looks like they actually marked positive is over towards the left. And so of course negative, the side with the stripe, go towards the right. And then just double check, do a sanding check, C325, 220 microfarads at 25 volts. And I did in fact grab 220 microfarads at 25 volts. Perfect. So now all I have to do is just kind of get that in there, splay the leads out. And I'm not going to solder it yet. I'm going to put in all the other ones, and then I'll go through and just solder them all in one go. Okay, and got my soldering iron warmed up. Just gotta clean off the tip, and we should be G2G. When I solder things, I usually put just a tiny bit of solder on the tip, just to help with heat transfer. The actual soldering of the things though, you don't want to put solder on the tip because it'll make a cold joint. You really don't need a lot on there either. Just a touch. My terminology is make it look like a tiny Hershey kiss. That's what a good joint should look like. This one's a little dull. Okay. And I'm just going through, soldering. It's just a matter of doing that, and then of course snip the leads when you're done. Gonna set up another time lapse while I take care of that. Got things squared away except for this thing. I have no idea what it's for, what it's doing. I put it back, but the joints holding it together are a little messy. Definitely not my best work, but I'm just gonna kind of leave well enough alone, say it's good enough. Another thing I forgot to mention was on some of the joints looked kind of crappy, like they had been poorly repaired by someone, especially the ones for all the knobs. So I reflowed those joints, added a little bit of fresh solder, and they seem to be a little less dull. Anyways, I'm gonna get the this guy ready to be recapped after I take a little break, of course. But then after I recap that, we should be ready to put this back together. So I need to charge my phone, so I'm gonna do most of this off camera, but it looks like this access panel will give me access to the board, and that heatsink is secured independent from this access port. So I can just take it off, do my work, and
then, well, I'll be golden. I won't have to take a bunch of stuff off. Okay, so just as well I had to charge my phone, because these two guys were the biggest pain to remove. Not only are they held in by glue, they have a third lead that's just there to keep them stable. So that was really annoying. I did lift a pad on this one. So I got it prepared so I could get it sorted out, and this one I may have also lifted. Either way, they were really annoying to remove, but now that I've got them out, I'm just going to go through, get the rest of these capacitors removed. All right, I think that's a wrap. Just pushing down that bodge wire, and it's pretty good. There's some joints that don't look very good at all, but hopefully they're good enough. I'm just gonna get this mostly together, and then I'll test it out. Well, I got it mostly put back together. Speaker A switch is misaligned, so I think I'm just gonna hook it up to speaker B. And oh hey, where'd the knob go? This one is loose fitting. Knobs aren't perfectly aligned, but I don't really care. This is the scariest part. Plugging it in and hoping nothing explodes. Plug in something to the aux inputs. Right there.
see if I get something out of it. Alright, I didn't have speaker wire to test it with speakers, but when I had my headphones on, I noticed the right channel was very quiet. So I'm guessing maybe the leaky capacitors did some more damage to like some of the traces for the right channel. But we'll see how the speakers sound. If the speakers also have the same issue, then we'll know there's something wrong with the actual channels in the amplification circuitry. Otherwise, you know, turning the balance helps at least helps me pretend that the issue isn't there. Other thing was I messed up with installing the switches. Power switch is now up here, and the other two, these switches are down here, so everything's kind of mirrored. That was a big blunder. Anyways, I'm gonna go shower, get some dinner, and grab that speaker wire. Alright, got some speaker wire. Once I put my dinner in the oven, I think I'll get this stuff set up. I don't know why I'm including this. I actually don't know why I bought this. I don't need it. Can never have too many, I guess. Anyways, I'll get these all spliced up, ready to go, and we'll see how this performs. Okay, I think about 3 feet for each one should be more than enough. Okay, so now we're gonna have to split the cables, and we're gonna have to strip them. I usually do about 1/2 inch when I strip audio cables. Usually white stripe, I do negative. Okay, so that's one. Last thing I need to do is put these on the screw terminal. Okay, I'm just gonna use a drill. These are a real pain to work with. Hold it. Right, minus, plus. Plus here. Just rinse and get a little bit more manageable. Stopped recording for some reason, but I'm just getting the last guy on here. Okay. That'll do. So now I'm going to test it out. Alright, so the results aren't fantastic. I have to have the balance almost all the way to the right in order for me to hear normal channel separation, but I can probably chase that issue down some point. I think though for now, I'm going to call that a success. I mean, even with just the left channel blaring, if I have mono turned on so that all channels just go into that guy, it sounds great. Sound is very clear. This thing is still packs a punch. I love it. Okay, so originally this section I wanted to just leave in and edit it like the rest of the video, but it got way too long and I felt like it was really all over the place and just confusing. So I wanted to just do a voiceover and just use the footage I filmed as B-roll. So the first thing I did was I just looked at the volume knob, mainly the solder pads for the volume knob. There was one trace that looked a little dubious, so I tried testing it with a multimeter, and I found that the resistance was a little bit higher than it should have been. Normally, if you have a direct connection, the resistance is going to be like just the internal resistance of the multimeter. In this case, that's about 0.2 ohms. So I tried doing a bodge wire just to connect it to the other pad that the trace leads to. And that didn't fix the problem. I still had the same problem where the right channel was way too quiet. So then what I tried was just going through and reflowing all the solder joints I could find that looked a little dubious. I thought, maybe this might help. Then I decided, you know what, let's reflow the solder joints for the amplifier chips towards the back. And that wasn't a problem. The problem was I bridged a solder joint, which just so happened to be the one for the left channel on speaker circuit A, and I ended up blowing that speaker. So I got a little bit spooked by that. I thought, oh no, I ruined this, I broke it. Turns out it was just the speaker. I found the bridge solder joint, I cleaned that up, made it so that it's no longer bridged, and I took my good speaker to test the left channel, and it still works. But I still had the same problem with the right channel, where it was really quiet and just could not be balanced properly with the volume of the left channel. Then, one thing I noticed was when I was playing with the volume during testing, there was kind of like a dead spot. And by dead spot, I mean that as I was turning up the volume, the right channel was a little bit matched with the left. Then, once it got to a certain point, the volume for the right channel would just drop off. So that to me was kind of a smoking gun. I felt, okay, the volume knob is the issue. So I ordered these equivalent potentiometers. As it turns out, the potentiometers for this receiver, are a pretty standard off-the-shelf component that you can just get on Amazon in a pack of 5 for like $7. So that's what I did. I think the only issue with that was that the old potentiometer had an extra connection for speaker circuit B. I think at least it was speaker circuit B. I'm not quite sure exactly what it was, but anyways, I replaced that and the issue was still there. So I was really frustrated and I thought, there's no way I can fix this. Then I thought about, I cleaned the switches with contact cleaner, but I hadn't reflowed the solder joints for the switches, and sure enough, I looked at them, and they didn't look that great. So I reflowed all the solder joints, and on the post that had the wire wrapped around it, normally with receivers of this vintage, that's pretty common with some connections where solid core wire is wrapped around a post a bunch of times, and the connection is pretty good. But I just decided, you know what, let's play it safe and add a little bit of solder to all of them. So I did, and that fixed the problem. So the issue was just the switchboards. And honestly, that should have been the first thing I tried, because when I looked at a forum about this issue, I looked up this issue on a forum. Somebody had it with a totally different receiver, and everybody was saying, play with all the switches, like the tape monitor switch, the loudness switch, all those switches that will change the EQ or change change the input. Play with those, see what happens. And this is an issue that I had with my Onkyo receiver, that playing with the switches also fixed the issue. So I honestly should have tried that from the beginning. Thing is, I did, and it didn't seem to really help. So I'm pretty sure that the issue was actually the solder joints needed to be reflowed on that switchboard. And now that I've done that, it works. The right channel sounds just as loud as the left channel, and the receiver sounds great. I love this little receiver. It may not be super powerful. Arguably might not even have been worth recapping, but for me, it was worth it just because this holds a lot of sentimental value, and also it's a really small, low-profile unit, so it's perfect for this little setup that I have here. Basically, I'm going to call it my test bench, where I'm just plugging things in that I want to test out without having to plug it into the hi-fi in my living room. When the new speakers come in, I'll do a separate video with that. Might even try out YouTube Shorts, and I'll upload that separately. But in any case, I'm pretty happy with the outcome of this project. Even though it took longer than I wanted it to, I learned a lot through this process of chasing down the issue. Now, about the volume knob, even though it didn't technically fix the issue, I am still overall happy that I replaced it. Because, I mean, the dead spot isn't still there. That issue isn't present on the new one. So it wasn't a total waste of time, but, you know, it would have been, I think it would have been much more meaningful of my time if I had tested those switches. Anyways, thank you for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.